So the big question is this: how do real estate investors who don't have a ton of free time, don't have access to off-market deals, and didn't start life on third base, how do we conservatively grow our real estate business to support our families, finally leave the corporate rat race, and build a legacy? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. I'm Ed Matthews, and this is Real Estate Underground. Greetings and salutations, Real Estate Undergrounders. This is Ed Matthews with the Real Estate Underground. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am really excited because I have been stalking this guy through his books for quite some time now. I actually picked up this gentleman's book, 10,000 Miles to the American Dream, and I was absolutely fascinated by it. And so I started stalking him, and the members of our team started stalking him, and he's graciously agreed to join us on the podcast today. So Reed Goossens, welcome to the show, and thank you for meeting today.
An absolute pleasure, my friend. It's great to finally connect. I know we've been,
Absolutely.
Our schedules have been both busy, but it's great to finally carve out some time to jump on the podcast and say g'day.
Indeed, we are absolutely both very busy people. So yeah, I appreciate you carving out some time. One of the things that intrigued me is your background is somewhat similar to mine. I come from a technology background, although I'm not an engineer. And, you obviously are an engineer by trade. One of the things that I'm always fascinated by with people that are wired the way, people like you and I are wired is we want to know everything before we do anything. And, I'm curious about, obviously you're a very successful syndicator. You've written 2 books, although I haven't read the second one, but I will. I'm just curious, as a syndicator, as an operator, how do you approach this business? And, how do you get enough information to be able to make a good decision on the things that you invest in?
Very good question. Very open-ended question. I think a lot of the people that I speak to on my podcast as well are ex-engineers and have that analytical mindset. But sometimes that analytical mindset can be a bit of a hindrance for us to move forward, right? Yeah. Move the puck down the ice, as you Americans like to say. But at the end of the day, this business is an act of being an engineer. And I've worked in many offices with some very smart people who are like, I don't want to say the word dumb smart, but like they're so smart, but they won't get out of their own way to go and do more with their money or so I had that analytical mindset, but I remember being in some offices and being like that ugly duckling. I'm like, I'm definitely not the smartest person here talking about shear diagrams and stress elements on a structural thing and building model. I'm like, I'm more like, let's go out and talk about how do we put in the ground. Let's be practical. But there is always that inherent inside of us to be fearful of, well, not all the traffic lights are green, so I can't go forward. Right. And there comes that blind sense of, I need to go into the darkness. I don't know what all the things are going to be, all the answers to all the questions, but I know enough to make that step. And I think that's trusting your ability to bet on yourself, because at the end of the day, if you don't bet on yourself, you're still going to be continuing in the same path that you always were, which is giving you probably that sense of there's more to give here. Right. So for me, it was like, I remember being in those engineering firms and, just pulling like, this is just not for me. And like trying to get my structural P&G and my license. And it was just like, I just don't see myself doing this. And it got to the point after 8 years and I was like, I'm done. I need to figure out how to pivot. And there was a lot of real chats that came along with that. I'm sure a lot of your listeners out there who are engineers get to that point. I can't see 50 feet down the hill. And so I'm not going to move. I'm not going to do anything. That's not the answer. You're still like, what's the old saying? When it's foggy out and you're driving on a highway, you don't stop. You just go slower. And that's how we all have to learn to bet on ourselves and know that there's going to come that point where we've got to take the leap of faith.
Yeah. It's interesting. You talk about, and I sense, and I always pick up on, that bias towards action, right? And the running joke in my end of the world was, the more letters after your name, PhD, MBA, whatever, the less likely you were to ever make a decision. So it's interesting, given your bias towards action and your entrepreneurial spirit and obviously your intellect, you could probably do a lot of different things. What drew you to real estate?
Good question. When I remember back to the time when I was sitting in that cubicle going, what the hell I want to do with my life, I just, I didn't know the word entrepreneurship. You mentioned that a couple of times. It's just a sexy word for small business, right? Let's be honest. Right. But this is back in 2010. And I was 24, 25 at the time. And it was just like, I know I need to do more with my life. And I just happened to stumble upon the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which helped me lay out there is more out there. And so you have to, how to get your money working for you. Coincidentally, my dad, even though he was just a high school teacher, he was a high school teacher. So pretty average income, but had done relatively well buying a few houses in Australia and had grown in wealth. And I was like, well, And also I build things. So I'm like, well, it should be real estate, right? Like it was like, all the arrows were pointing to real estate. It wasn't like go and get, a stock portfolio or go and start a gym business that I had no idea about. So it was something that I was just like, keep following the yellow brick road, and all the things led towards real estate. So that's really the simple answer. It was nothing more complex than that.
Yeah, and so over time, I mean, you've acquired 4,000 plus units, right?
Yep. So for 4,500 units in total, we've sold some, we bought some more, but that's been, I think to date, the total portfolio over the last 10 years has been over $800 million. It's a big number.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Like sitting here today, I don't feel $800 million rich. You know what I mean? Like I work for my investors.
At one point it becomes monopoly money, right?
Right. And it's just, okay, wow, I'd maybe hit $1 billion in the next couple of years. That's insane.
Yeah.
But also the people I compare myself to have already surpassed the $1 billion mark. And not that I'm comparing and I've got to run my own race, but yeah, like 10 years ago when I moved to this country, I didn't have a job. I door knocked until I found one. I was chasing a girl, and 10 years later, here I am, or longer, 11 years later, here I'm talking about our podcast. So the whole thing here is, guys, if you're listening, it's not to boast and talk about these big fancy numbers. It's just to be like, hey, if he can do it, why can't I do it? And I came here with limited knowledge and, as I say, took action and make it happen.
All for the love of a young lady.
Two loves. One was the young lady. The second love was actually to live in New York City. I'd backpacked through New York City. I was like, I got to live in this city. This thing's a breathing, living beast that I've just got to experience at some point in my life. And yeah, we had the opportunity to move out here. And back to that question of pushing yourself. Like I remember getting on the plane and going, well, what's the worst case scenario here? Well, if I go for 3 months and don't find a job, I'll just have to move back to Australia. And that's, I'll go back to an engineering job. That was the worst case.
Right.
But what happens if I stayed in my engineering job in Australia and never got on that plane? Well, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. So the fear of regret really pushed me to be more and challenge yourself. And I think that's a muscle we all have to learn to work on as
true. Yeah. It's interesting. It's Tony Robbins says, people change for one of really two basic reasons, right? It's either pain or pleasure, right? And whatever is more real in your own mind and the story that you tell yourself is how you act, right? And so pleasure of coming to America, the pleasure of building a business and, creating a platform to support your family for, potentially generations, right? Became far more attractive than the pain of having to tuck your tail back, hop on a plane and go home.
That's right. No, trust me, I say, that was the worst thing that could happen. But there would have been a lot of like soul searching and tail between the legs and going, this didn't work, sorry, and like raising the white flag. But the point is, I still weighed up that option.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's not that bad. Let's jump, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And, it's interesting that, I'm always interested in, what makes people tick in their own mind, right? So similar experience to you. I was standing I had the blessing to work for some really amazing entrepreneurs or small business people, in my Silicon Valley days. And, there was the last company I worked for, a company called DocuSign. Keith Kroc, who is one of the absolute pantheon legends of that world, is up and he is, doing his annual talk. I refer to it as the laser leg show because I swear he lifts off the ground and there's lasers that shoot out of his back, but because he's one of the most charismatic people I've ever met in my entire life. But I'm standing there and I'm thinking I should be more excited about this conversation, this talk than I am, and think it's time. I got to go. Right. Same thing. And, I'm a big fan of, the story of Cortez where he burns the boats and found that his men were far more motivated now that they had no way to go home. I didn't do that, but I was more like you. What's the worst thing that could happen? I'll go get another job. Right. And, now I'm very happy to say, I got a phone call from an old boss of mine a few months ago. He's like, any chance? I'm like, no, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the call, but my friend, but no, thank you. I'm never going back to that. And
so that's the universe challenging you a little bit, right?
A little bit, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a time we were, struggling a little bit. So it did cause me pause, but, and I'm sure you've gone through those situations as well, where, it didn't go quite according to plan and somehow you persevered. Right?
Yeah. There's going to be those days and there's that squiggly line of entrepreneurship. It's not just straight and up to the right. It's, up and down, up, you're right. But that's why entrepreneurship is. So when you start in this business or any business that you start, it's important to have other like-minded people around you because it is lonely. It's a lonely journey that you're going to go on. And hopefully you've married someone or you've got a partner who supports you. But there's a larger percentage than zero. Right. Getting on a bus and seeing these crappy buildings in places you'd never live, what the hell does that mean? So it even starts with like your spouse and who do they support you? But that's why it's so important to find your tribe and your group so you can, you don't feel lonely in the pursuit when things get hard, because they will get hard. Having mentors, having meetup groups, doing whatever it is to surround yourself with other people saying, man, I've been in that exact same situation and this is how I got through it. Let's chat.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So team, obviously you don't go from ending in New York City with a backpack on to, 4,500 units without, some sort of help. Right. And, I'm curious about how you've constructed your team, what it looks like today, and, how do you manage business? So we'll talk about systems.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
A motivated seller just filled out your web form. If you call back within 5 minutes, you're nearly 4 times more likely to get that seller appointment. But delay your follow-up by even just 10 minutes? Forget it. You're toast. Ella Vista Connect calls that lead back in 60 seconds, qualifies them, and schedules your meeting. Find out how much slow follow-up is costing you. Free calculator at ellavista.com/underground.
But I want to talk about team first.
Yeah, so the team today actually consists of about 6 people. We have five full-time employees. We are not in the same city. We are across the country, and because we buy assets in markets, I have strategic members of the team in those markets who work for me full-time.
Got it.
They are boots on the ground. I spent many years getting on flights, not being able to do that work, right? And juggle the full-time job and be like remote on a Friday, but flying out on the Thursday night to go and to San Antonio to see the deal and being on phone calls. Yeah, the camera's off for a reason, So now I have someone who lives in Central Texas who literally covers 3-hour radius and can see every deal that I ever want to see. And that changed, when my wife was like, you need to be able to, you've made some money, reinvested in the business and reinvested in people. And that was being the biggest thing to run. I don't know if you know Brandon Turner from Bigger Pockets, but he came on my show, and he was talking about like the tricycle, right? You sit on the tricycle and you're pedaling, and then you might upgrade it to a mountain bike. It's still a bike, but you're still pedaling. If you get off, the bike ain't moving.
Right.
You might then bring on a partner who's also maybe working a full-time job but is in it and it's a tandem. But if you both get off, the bike doesn't move. But if one gets off, the bike can still move. Then there's the next analogy is like the car, right? So you've got a dashboard. You can start measuring things, but you've got a couple of passenger seats.
Yep.
The next one up to that could be a train or an airplane. Then you go faster and faster. Right. But it's all about how you grow and find those seats around you to help keep moving the vehicle forward. And that's been a really powerful thing. It costs me money, multiple 6 figures. But I need to realize that I can't do it all, and it's burning me out if I try to do it all. So today, I just employed another guy who's my head of equity sales. We spent a ton of money on Facebook advertising, building the brand, building the podcast. But what we found was we generated like something like 1,500 leads in the last 6 months. So all coming in and dying on the vine because I was too busy running the operations. I needed someone to follow up with them. I'm in sales, but I've never been a sales guy, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I needed to go find someone who could make the calls and follow up and do the sale and the closing, to make our ship run quicker,
Sure.
or go quicker. So that's an example of, I don't know if this is going to work. Hope it works. I'm going to spend 6 figures on you. You better raise money. You know what I mean? So there's always going to be, we're talking earlier, the unknown. I have to make that commitment. I don't know if this is going to work in 6 months' time, but I'm going to make the bet. At least I scratch that itch and know, okay, in 6 months' time, we could be even bigger than what we are today. And that's that really intrigues me. I'm like, well, this could be planting the seed. And back to you, Tony Robbins. I think it's either Tony Robbins or someone says, you want to be hiring 6 months in advance of when you really need the person.
Right.
And that's where the team looks like today. But let's not beat around the bush. There was many years working full-time job, doing it all, trying to get the podcast, underwriting deals, getting on planes, trying to have a life with my fiance and wife now, having a personal life, like literally pulling your hair out. And it ain't for the faint-hearted. So you understand why people go, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to stick in my cubicle and it's my engineering job and I'm fine with that. That's cool. No judgment. But for me, it was, I fear regret and I want to give it a crack in my late 20s and 30s and then, see what happens thereafter.
And frankly, it's interesting. So you were talking about, having a partner who understands this. It was one of the things that my wife, even to this day, we talk about. I mean, I've been full-time now for 5 years. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And married for 27, and that's still working out too. She still likes me, which is the thing is, my wife, Patricia, looks at a W-2 job as security. And I look at that as a risk, right? Because, you're employed at the whim of someone in some corner office somewhere, unless you are the person in the corner office, at which point then you have a board of directors to answer to, and they can be whimsical as well. The fact is that the only way to be, sure of your success is, I'm a big fan of eating what killing what you have to eat, right? And team is a big part of that. And that book, Over Your Shoulder, Who Not How, is a phenomenal book to learn how to do that, right? Because, the fact that there is you will burn out. I guarantee it. And, I was one of those guys. I'm sure you were as well. That, you probably don't need 8 hours of sleep. And, between.
I like it. Let me say to the listeners, prioritizing sleep is the number one thing in my day. So I'll let you keep going, but to just
same. But I learned that late in life, right? There were my unfair share of very late nights, doing a whole bunch of things that we were doing, traveling and slinging software and services. But the fact that you will burn out, guaranteed 100%. There is no one is bulletproof, right? And, having a team and also systems, which we'll get into in a second, is really the only way I know how to grow a business, right? Because, first off, you mentioned it and I say the same thing. If I walk into a room and I'm the smartest person in the room, we are in a lot of trouble because that's a good thing, right? And, you hire people that are great at what they do. You figure out what their superpowers are and apply them. But, I look at hiring people as a return on investment, much if I'm buying a piece of software or a building or anything, right? If I'm giving you $1, I need $1.25 plus back, right? To make it worth, make it worth the investment. And when preferably I'd like $1.50. That would be wonderful. But, it also has to start somewhere. But, the fact is it's a return on investment. So yes, I bet it cost you 6 figures. I know it did. And hopefully you made multiple 6 figures because that person's really good at their job, right?
No, that's right. And to your point, it is an investment. And even for the listeners who are like, oh, I don't have 6 figures. Let's break it down even earlier. When I was still working full time, I realized I couldn't underwrite enough deals. I couldn't plus keep the full-time job going.
Right.
So 2 things I did. 1, structural engineer. I went and got a job, the highest paying corporate job. Plus I had visa issues. I wasn't on a green card with a development company here in Los Angeles. So I used my skills to go and upsize and then be learning from them, plus doing my deals on the side. The second thing I did was hire online analysts. I developed out my own spreadsheets about how I like to analyze deals, and I encourage everyone to do that, regardless of where you are in the business. And that's for either analyzing businesses or fix and flipping or big multifamily, but have your own spreadsheet. Teach someone for $15-20 an hour who can then go and do 4 to 6 deals a week, which is 4 to 6 deals more than what I was looking at. And that is a very small cost that will make sure that you go, well, hey, I'm worth more 20 or $15 an hour. And my time is more precious doing other things, even when I'm working full time. And that was I still remember to this day going, oh, $20 an hour, like that's coming straight out of the paycheck, and having to justify it to my girlfriend / wife at the time. I was like, this will help me run faster. It's only a small step, but it's an example of what now leads to when I can make a decision on a 6-figure person today.
So let's talk about systems. You mentioned the spreadsheet and sharing that. What is your perspective on systematizing your business and how do you go about doing that?
At a pain point of mine, I set up for my podcast, where I'm speaking on a podcast, I have a system or had a system where it was, record, drop, editor comes in, he does it all, puts, everything from show notes to titles, and then I have a VA who uploads it all. I just changed to a new system and it required me then uploading stuff to a form and filling out a bunch of stuff. And I was like, this is not going to work. This is too much for me. Like just a little thing like that I've already spent the last 5 years building. I was like, one of the questions was, what's you talk about in the episode? I was like, listen to the goddamn episode. That's what I'm hiring you to edit my podcast. But it's an example of making systems in businesses is the thing that I'm doing. And now being as a CEO, my job is to help encourage the team to create a system where there is inefficiency. And 2, make sure I've got the right person in the right seat. And if I don't have those things happening, then my business isn't going anywhere. And the other thing I'll say is that I've built all the systems for myself in the business. I've done the asset management, the underwriting, the deal finding, the construction management, the dealing with the property manager, dealing with the lenders, dealing with investors. I've done it all. And you have to, as a solo entrepreneur, to then go out and delegate and then go out and create those systems to make you more efficient. And there's going to be things that you're never going to, it still requires a human or a body. It's not just a piece of software. But if you're always constantly, the old saying, work on the business, not in the business, process. And that is my job today, is to make sure I am systemizing, or at least encouraging my team to think about how they make things more efficient, because we ain't doing it, the stress that comes along with managing large properties. You want to make sure that you're doing it in the most efficient way possible.
Right on. Yeah. It's so important. Highest and best use is something that we talk about constantly here. And, it is, you shouldn't be doing $20 an hour work, not to diminish it, but if you are, the value you bring to the table is $500 an hour work. And, it comes down to, something as simple as looking back at your day and saying, okay, how much time did I spend on $500 an hour work versus, $20 an hour work? And sometimes it has to be me for whatever reason. But I look at things the same way. If from a process perspective, if I have to fill out a form, process is broken. I guarantee you I'm not going to be the guy that's going to fill out that form, on a daily basis. It's just not wired. I got too many other things going on. And so, I look for technology, enabling technologies, processes, and human beings to take me out of as much of the day-to-day as humanly possible.
One thing I'll add to that is, because I am a little bit of a in regards to breaking it and putting it back together, I also have a way that I want it to be done, particularly when you bring on a new person. And I remember my first VA that I hired, he was failing at the task, not because he was bad at the task, but because I was bad at giving the instruction. Yep. And I remember that to this day and going, oh my gosh, this guy, he's useless. I need to fire him. Wait, he's failing because you didn't explain it properly. So it's things like Loom, where I writing an email, waste of my time. Getting on Loom, quickly recording it, showing my screen, this is what I want. Boom. It's now documented and I can put it somewhere. And he doesn't have, do you have any questions? No questions. Great. We have a success. Yes. And that is, and I say that because I train myself also to be a better leader and to explain it in a way that my team can, again, is a very low paid BA, but even to this day, when I talk about my asset manager or my head of, finance or, things that are higher paying stuff, I still have to come from that. Am I explaining this in a way that is, or am I communicating in a way that you understand where I want this puck to go? And I want your input on that to say, can we make this, is what I'm saying is absolute trollop, or is it, do you agree this is the most efficient way to move this thing forward? And sometimes we'll have a discussion about it and we'll move on and we'll build a system and off it goes.
It's interesting to build on that. I was interviewing a gentleman, actually met him on Twitter. His name's Nick Huber. He runs several companies and is quite successful. Sweaty Startup, I believe, is his moniker. But one of the things he said about systems, which really resonated with me, was that, you're not going to always be able to hire A players, right? And so you've got to basically set up systems and processes so that a normal person, an average person, can come in and succeed, right?
Yep. That's right.
That simple. So
that is correct.
So let's move on to the final four. So these are the four loaded questions I ask everybody. You mentioned mentors earlier, and obviously, I think in order to get to the level that you've gotten to, you've had to have had people that throw an arm around you for one reason or another. And so I'm curious about the best advice you ever got and who gave it to you.
I have to give it to my dad. I always give it to my dad. It's a fool and their money are easily parted. Don't be a fool. And that just goes back to education. Yes, I've had many mentors. I think mentors are the number one thing. We didn't even get into betting on yourself and paying for my first mentor. I remember that anguish going through my mind. Yep. But you're worth it. And we as individuals need to not be that fool. And the second step is that you are worth investing in mentorship and, coaching to make you better, because we're not just born with all this experience. Kobe Bryant wasn't the best at what he does without having certain coaches around him. And that applies to business as well today.
Okay. So next question. So I'm always interested in leaders like yourself. Leaders tend to be readers, obviously, just looking at the background of your room there. I'm curious about a couple of things. First and foremost, how do you consume information? Is it physical books? Is it audio books? Is it podcasts, webinars, conferences, whatever? And then I'm also really curious about who you're paying attention to these days, who you're learning from.
So I go to all the things. I do the podcast, I do the conferences, I do the reading. Specifically around reading, I read physical books. My name is Reed, and I was in a remedial reading class growing up. Today, I'm not so glad to force myself to read. So before I go to bed every night, I'm reading a physical book, not audio book. It doesn't count. I don't care what you say, but I'm reading a physical book. It helps me relax. It's not the phone. It helps me also go to sleep. So that's what I definitely do. Always listen to podcasts. In terms of who I'm following right now, I'm following the rate guy, JP Conklin, I think his name is. He's out of Charlotte. He is the head of Pensford. Pensford being the group that does a lot of rate caps for larger multifamily or larger commercial real estate. He's a very interesting gentleman that I follow religiously now as we're going through just what the Fed is doing, his opinion on it. That's really important. I also listen to The Economist. The Economist magazine is now in form. In terms of real estate, not that I've figured it out, but I'm my own mastermind. I created, and I'm around other people who are as big or bigger than I am, which is really important. And then obviously going to conferences, probably twice or three times a year, trying to speak on stage and meet other people who are like-minded like myself. So the whole gambit, and making sure that I'm keeping up to date with the current issues that are affecting my business in my life.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to use your hockey analogy, you've got to skate where the puck's going, not where it is, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So if you had to start over, some guy in Connecticut with a magic wand waves his wand and says, all right, Reed, you can take back all your knowledge, but you don't get anything else. What would you do differently?
The ignorant answer, or the obnoxious answer, is I wouldn't do anything differently. And I think the answer is the same. When I first landed in the US, literally within 2 weeks, I was at my first RIA event, REIA, the Real Estate Investment Association. Yeah. I didn't have that in Australia, but I had a small networking event in Australia that happened to be in my local city that I was going to really regularly, and I was getting a ton of information. I encourage everyone to go to your local RIA, wherever you are. And as an Australian moving to the US, the tapestry and the networking that you guys had even back in 2011, 2012 was on steroids compared to where I come from in Australia. So don't take that for granted. It is at your fingertips. We live in 2023. It's so much easier to find people who do what we do. And from there, I encourage people to go to at least 6 events, live events, and I bet you will start meeting people that will help you change your life and get you on the path that you want to go down. I 100% bet. So if I did it again, exactly the same thing. If it was in a different business, I would do exactly the same thing. I would find out where everyone goes to, whether it be online or in person, where I'm interested in to learn about a particular business, and that's what I would do.
I love that. Yeah, it's interesting. You run across these people that were, I'm sure you get approached as well. How do you get into this business? How do you get started? The questions are always, what's stopping you? And, it's either, I don't know where to find the deals. I don't know where to find the money, or, I just don't have, or all of the above. And, going to a RIA, I had this conversation with a gentleman about 2 years ago, and I threw an arm around him and I turned him around to the crowd. And I said, in this crowd, there are people who are selling properties right now. And there are multiple millionaires who spend their days investing in brand new investors just like you. Go introduce yourself. There's no easy way. You have to go shake hands and become friends, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So Reed, when you're not talking about real estate, what do you like to do?
Surfing and rugby.
I see.
I've got the rugby ball behind me. A massive Wallabies fan. The World Cup's coming up here in September. 4 years ago, which I can't believe, I was in Japan for my first ever Rugby World Cup. I'm not going to France this year, but my other big thing is keeping fit. I love surfing, and I love going to the gym and keeping. If I don't work out once a day, I'm going stir crazy. So those are the things that I love. I just have a 10-month-old as our first kid, so it's been a big handbrake. Thank you very much. It's the hardest. I say starting a business is extremely effing hard. Having a baby is even harder.
Set it down. Boy or girl?
Little girl.
Good for you. I am a girl dad myself. Your life, you think it's hard now. Your life will only change 90 different times between now and 18 and beyond. Mm-hmm. But the first big one that's coming up is when she learns how to walk. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean walk as in pet. I mean stand up sprint. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And she's already like, Dad, no, she's not saying Dad, but I hold her arms and she's already walking along. I'm like, here we go.
Pull up, friend. It's about to get interesting, right?
Exactly.
So Reed, I've really enjoyed the conversation, and it's a pleasure to finally meet in person and, or at least virtually here. And so if people want to learn more about you, your investment business, your podcast, or anything else, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
The easiest way is go to my personal website. It's reedgoossens.com. That's ReedGoossens.com. A lot of O's, a lot of S's, a lot of E's in there. I understand that. Listen to back to that slowly if you're writing it down. And that's the easiest way to reach out. If you're ever coming through Los Angeles and you want to meet up for a coffee and talk shop, info@reedgoossens.com. Give me a couple of weeks heads notice and we'll hopefully be in town and we can hook up and talk a bit of real estate.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to take you up on that because my dad lives in Tycoon and I got to go see him. It's been a while.
So, I love surfing in San Clemente, some of the best surf in California. So
one of the biggest surfing schools in the world, right? Right down there.
Exactly.
All right. Well, hey, Reed, thank you so much. Once again, thank you for your time and your experience and your expertise. And I wish you well. And I'm looking forward to hearing about the next chapter.
Awesome, my friend. Be well.
This has been the Real Estate Underground podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It helps us grow. Until next time, happy investing. This has been the Real Estate Underground. Don't forget to subscribe. It helps us grow. Until next time, Undergrounders, remember your real estate journey begins with a simple step forward. Now get to it. Bye for now.